Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. My name is Jasper Dent, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers in Saskatoon. This event is being held on Treaty 6 territory, the land of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota, and homeland of the Métis Nation. Just a note that this event is being live streamed, so please be aware of the webcam to your right. And I'd also like to take this moment to remind you all to silence your phones. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Saskatoon launch of Realia by Michael Trussler, published by Radiant Press. I'd like to thank Michael for being here tonight and Radiant Press for working with us to help create this event. They publish amazing books. As you might be aware, this was supposed to be a joint launch tonight, with Courtney Bates-Fardy joining us to launch her poetry collection, Anatomical Venus. But unfortunately, Courtney is ill tonight and wasn't able to make it. So we're sending her our best wishes and hope that she'll be able to come back for a reading and signing sometime in the near future. Now I'd like to say a few words about Michael Trussler. Michael lives in Regina, Saskatchewan. He writes poetry and creative nonfiction. His work has appeared in Canadian and American journals and has been included in domestic and international anthologies. He's a photographer, he has a keen interest in the visual arts, and is neurodivergent. He teaches English at the University of Regina. I'll now turn things over to Michael. Please give him a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Jasper, and thank you everyone who's here, especially Deborah, especially John. My first book of poetry was with Hagios, and so it's with the lineage. It's really a pleasure and an honor to have this book accepted. So thank you so much for your support. And I would encourage those of you who are writers to send something to Hagios. Maybe I shouldn't be saying too much. You have a lot of volume in it. But I haven't had an experience that is quite as personal and as ongoingly generous. So thank you very much. Realia is a book that attempts to respond to our times. And I think it's true that, there we go. There's even microphones in the book, actually. Like, not real microphones, word microphones. It attempts to reply to our times. And this means that I'm skeptical about the lyric voice, the singular lyric voice, because everything is just so weird and happening all the time, pressing into us. I often feel when I'm writing a poem that I'm like a sailboat out on the ocean, and there's this wind, and there's this wind, and there's this wind. Whereas before, writing a lyric poem was much more almost serene, even if it was dealing with difficult things, but it was sort of moving in one direction. I don't feel that anymore. That being said, I'm going to start reading a bit of a poem that I began writing in 2002. And it is actually an homage to Katherine Mansfield, the amazing short story writer from New Zealand. Katherine Mansfield influenced so many short story writers, and she herself, of course, was very influenced by writers like Chekhov. Unfortunately, she died very young at the age of 34. This particular piece, I tried to bring together the craziness of the current world, but also looking steadily at her. And I quote in the various sections of the poem a bit from her diaries. And this is where there's the consistent lyrical voice. So what I'm going to do tonight is a little bit wonky. I'm going to read a bit of a section from Mansfield, or my response to Mansfield, and then I'm going to go to what my son calls my crazy ass poems that are things coming in from all over the place. I will say that the first time that I read Mansfield's The Garden Party, I felt I wanted to propose to her. Unfortunately, she was not there, but I just fell in love with her. So this is an entry from her diary, February 20th, um, of February 1920. And she's just gone to the ocean. And she says, and yet one has these glimpses before all that one has ever written. What has one written? All, yes, all that one has ever read. All of this pales. The waves, as I drove home this afternoon in the high foam, how it was suspended in the air before it fell. What is it that happens in that moment of suspension? It is timeless. In that moment, what do I mean? The whole life of the soul is contained. One is flung up and out of life. One is held and then down, bright, broken, glittering onto the rocks, tossed back, part of the ebb and flow. First, Chekhov. You searched through stains left on paper, Chekhov's diaries, his letters torn from their former lives, all those abandoned breaths in a room darkening green with evening's elms, the light of a world infinitely and progressively missing. You looked and looked with your grittier eye, but you couldn't find him, couldn't glimpse the wet bulk of his days, their chunks of inconsequence, milky, smooth animals hanging skinned in an obscure abattoir. And then you wanted to toss everything away except the stories. Tonight, I'm holding your journal, the one your husband got published in 1927. This very book, almost 100 years old. This book sprung from a century I can barely touch, though the 20th century made its way into you with that telegram, your brother lost in France, and what we came to call the First World War. His remaining words in France, lift my head, Katie, I can't breathe. And then you vowed your sentences would be debts sent to the dead. You call yourself KM in these pages you never saw in print, these small paragraphs that strip me, their brown eyes alive to the spaces the world makes around things. KM, did you smell me just beyond the pale wilds of your skin? Its blank heat, as you once believed you could find your missing brother. It's not a brother's love I'm offering. Meet me, not in these words, nor in the sea's high foam, but in what's suspended between them. Meet me here, caught between words and foam. You must now remember, learning with your hands, those pressed knees, either there's nothing worth keeping or nothing that can be kept. Our lives don't happen within us that way. But I want to tell you that tonight, it's so utterly cold, the Saskatchewan wind can freeze the skin on your face in less than a minute. A wind that sounds like workmen taking axes to ice. This poem is a brief lyric. It's called Nobody Move. It's on page 8. Nobody move. A miniature wooden dock, shining in the mist, is my spirit's alma mater. Something's gone. Beyond the end of this sentence, I understand almost nothing. The rest has been tinkering or torched, share and shock alike. A rehabilitated and endless rage must be at play. On the precipice of tears, conventional daylight is gooey and very quickly and plainly becoming the second most destroyed city on earth. Standing in for centuries, IV tubes are not people. my son thinks that that's just too weird, Dad.
I like to grow up.
Back to Mansfield. On January 1st, 1922, she wrote, I want to remember how the light fades from a room and how one fades with it, is expunged, sitting still, knees together, hands in pockets. Only you have found this room, this everlasting, ever-emptying room that night settles over us, settles down across us each day, pressing ocean thick beneath our eyelids. And now you must remember what you could never know, dying at a naked 34. You can't ever become sufficiently brutal to time and the many selves time urges upon us. Would you marry me? I once asked you, AM, as you like to call yourself. I said this the moment I first finished your garden party, the first of many times. My amazed joy. You looked away. Let me try something else. Okay, I'll throw in a children's library, wide open doorway that lets in the sea and the sand, some intimate apparel to reach into the space beside you. No? Okay, let me then go full throttle. Here's Tolstoy sipping, no gulping from a sin-dappled glass of dragonflies, and maybe now you'll make up your mind. Mirror some neurons. No, she says, I won't even let you kiss me. Sometimes what I do is I have a title that then slides into the poem. So this poem is called Increasingly Choreographed. Increasingly choreographed over Zoom, looking across the lifeboat. None of us can talk into our phones. Gone dead. How should we narrate the unraveling life of you scare me? If you feel you've been here before, then the child wants to know, where will the rest of us live? The answer, it turns out, is that a lot of people are old and dying habits. This gradually does not help. Failings. The door slamming sublime. It's like it knows. Back to Mansfield. On February 9th, 1922, she wrote, a miserable day. In the night, I thought for hours of the evil of uprooting. Every time one leaves anywhere, something precious which ought not to be killed is left to die. It astonished you how a house made of words is always better than anything we can be or forget or say. A house made of words lifts, flings us away from our times. And yet, without your rage, your quicksilver delights and anarchy, your vigilance, no words can happen. Pool beneath each other. Each story of yours saying no. Each story saying no. Once again to the long betrayal. Each story the encounter between faces, and still, even now, no one knows for whom stories are told. This poem is called Jubilant. 1. A voice told me, look, you're entirely here because of me. 2. Not always easy to overcome. The origins of collective memory can be traced back to the final Bronze Age, the Whitechapel fatberg, and everything that helped keep Jesus awake in church. Another voice said, listen, you still don't. It's not these herds of digital dead people watching. It's not the crowd-funded vigilantes. It's that something, that original astonishment that can't be walked away from. The Furies, cross-pollinating, the wilderness inside board toddlers. The moment in which the patient remembers the mother-of-pearl cliffs of sunlight asleep on a grandmother's bathroom floor. Each of us an unlocked cabinet of unfed mountain inside the cage of ribs that sing so. One of the things that I find interesting and strange about getting older is, of course, when the brain cells begin to die and jump out of wherever they're jumping out of, you get images that you didn't know you had. And I actually found it very difficult to be the grandson of a Pentecostal grandmother who, at one point I came into the room and she was talking to my cousin, and they both were pointing to the corner in the ceiling and they could see a demon there. And I thought, one just coming in for my chest, so I think I'm gonna go. But a while ago, suddenly I remembered the way the light came through her bathroom window and hit the floor. And it just struck me, that was an amazing thing. I don't know how many times I saw it as a child, but it was an amazing thing. But until the brain cells started, I don't know what they do, but they fall apart, they eat each other or something, and then you get these images. The final poem that I'm going to read is about poetry. I think everybody who writes poetry usually writes either about poetry directly or indirectly. So this is, in some respects, a contemporary reply to McLeish's poem Ars Poetica. That's the older one. A poem should not mean but be, etc. So to me, this is the nature of poetry in the 21st century. Ars Poetica. They asked me how long I'd been in salvage espionage and hullabaloo sign repair. Take some time. I mean, give or take. It's all in your head, right? Realism beckons. All you need is a laptop, a manipulative childhood, and a bag of sizzling thunderclaps. A satisfactory soundtrack. The talkative in unraveling brains, a baggage carousel. Decorative tinder. An invasive plant called complicity. A voiceover mentioning what remains to be said isn't done much anymore. Afterthoughts of what will have happened. And behind which door did your lover learn to harness nonstop hypnagogia? To be fair, sometimes people are ghost mushrooms speaking complex sentence patterns via electrical impulses, and other times a person is a peripatetic dog and a bicycle wheel withdraws into a wilderness of teeth. Thank you. I know this is the awkward moment. If there's any questions or comments or balloons or tomatoes to be thrown. Okay, where'd you get the title for your book? I don't really know. It just popped into my head, and then I didn't even know what the word meant. I just heard the word Realia, and so I thought, what is it? So I went to our dear friend Google, and I looked it up, and I went, okay, that's interesting. Realia are physical objects that ESL teachers bring into classrooms, and not just ESL teachers, but classrooms of any sort. And I thought, okay. And then I read further, Realia are pieces of skin, fingernails, hair, potentially teeth that come from a dead author that is given to a museum to put in a box. And I thought, now we're talking. This is good stuff. I really, really like this. And then realia is also, in philosophical terms, realia are things that are the opposite of idealistic philosophy. They are real things. And I thought, I don't know, sounds good. So Deborah doesn't know this, but afterwards I'm going to give her a box of fingernail clippings. Just kidding. Just kidding.
For my voodoo doll.
There you go.
Are the fingernail clippings all from radiant authors or people of all sorts?
Well, that's a good idea. Well, I knew that I trimmed my fingernails before I came because I'm a germaphobe, but I should have brought the fingernail clippers, clipped everyone's fingernails here, and then given them to Deborah.
No,
Next, I'm gonna have to publish another book for the reality. Oh no, that's what we're gonna do in Regina on Tuesday. We'll pass around fingernail clippers. And what they won't know what to do with them, right? Because they're not here. Those sort of go,
it could be something, yeah, like merch.
absolutely. Hadn't thought about that. Yes, sir.
So if I'm right, you've published 3, maybe 4 books of poetry in the last 3 or 4 years.
1, 4.
Yeah. So
How do you do that?
do you ever eat, sleep?
Oh, I get my sleep. I go to bed at 9:30 and I get up from when John gets up around 5:30. I'm sort of manic. And I mean, I'm not diagnosed bipolar, but I am kind of manic, and I just find myself always writing poetry. Always. What's hard is to step away from the poetry and try to work on some creative nonfiction, because I'm not like you, Dave. I can't do both. If I'm in one genre, I have to stay in it. So I'm trying to polish up a book of creative nonfiction, but to do that, I have to leave the poetry. But since the poems keep coming, I just go with the poems.
You take them through many drafts?
Oh yeah, I mean the Mansfield one, as I say, I started in 2002. It has been reincarnated many times. Now I didn't read more than half the poem because I try to exert or push her into the contemporary moment. I talk about oceans, cargo ships, pollution, and other things. And this was not anywhere present in 5 drafts. But yeah, and then some of them I'm lucky. The poem can come out fairly quickly and fairly intact. But whenever I start writing a new poem, I always read the manuscript I'm working on. And so I start at the beginning, and that means that a little bit of polishing here, a little bit of polishing there, or just hacking. But yeah, there's a lot of revision. And I'm lucky enough to belong to a writers group in Regina, and so we share each other's work, and I get a lot of good ideas from that. Like we mentioned Kathleen Walsh, she's in the group. Well, thank you.
One more question.
Yes, of course.
I really like the idea of your one-sided dialogue with KM. Just wondered if you could just talk a little bit about that. I don't know what I want. I don't know what I want to hear. I don't know what you could tell me. But I just like the idea of that. I'm working on some poems about a dead woman I admire tremendously, and I'm trying different ways to get into it. So that was an interesting part.
Yeah. Just have to think for a second. I like almost every writer I read. The only writer I've read that I've not liked is Dryden, but pretty much every other writer that I read, I like, admire. But then there are some writers that I feel they know things and have articulated things that seem so fundamental to my understanding of the world. And so Katherine Mansfield is one of them. And I first read her when I was quite young in my 20s. And I just felt love. I mean, I just felt this tremendous love for this person who was able to construct these stories with these words. And so then I was lucky to get her diary. And like I said in the poem, the book is the original one from 1922 in the University of Regina Library. It's like, this is it, it's got this weird little cover that they used to have back then. And so I started reading them and I thought, this woman is on fire. She never shuts off. She is just so aware of absolutely everything. And it didn't hurt that she also had clinical depression, because she'd finish a story and then just nosedive, and she's desperate because she's in between stories and she doesn't. And I was working on a short story collection at the time as well. And it spoke to me. And so I found myself literally talking to her aloud. I mean, I closed the office door or I'd be out walking. Of course, back in those days, if you're talking aloud, they don't think you have a Bluetooth. They think you're, talking to Katherine Mansfield. And so I just felt that I wanted to say a couple of things to her. And I just wanted to say, basically, thanks. But then it became, I really do want to marry you. And so I'm thinking, what can I do? And so I got to write a poem that she will like, and I couldn't. As I say, I'm trying hard. I'm going to give her Tolstoy, okay, and I'm going to get Tolstoy's drinking a glass of dragonflies. Will that do it? No, I won't even let you kiss her. So I found that she made me go places in my own poetry that I would never have gone without. And I've never had this relationship with any other poet. So I don't have a whole series of these. This is the only one. There is a Holocaust writer whose name is Eddie Hillesum, who's usually considered sort of the adult version of Anne Frank. They were both living in Amsterdam at the time. And I was at a friend's for dinner, and I could see her bookshelf, and there's this little thumbnail photograph, and the title was An Interrupted Life. And I thought, oh, I got to see what that's about. And so I pulled it off the shelf, and I'd never heard of Eddie Hillesum before. Looked at it, and ordered it immediately from Book and Briar. Got it, and it was similar to Mansfield. That I could not believe this person, just couldn't believe this person. And just like Mansfield loved Chekhov, Hillesum loved Rilke. And so I love Rilke too. I'm sure everybody here loves Rilke. So I found myself reading the Rilke that Hillesum was reading as she's writing her diaries. And I'm going, you are talking about this particular sentence in Letters to a Young Poet, or this particular line in the Dueno Elegies. And it was amazing to read Rilke through her. But I then went to Amsterdam. I went to see where she lived. I went to Westerbork, which is the transport camp in the north of Holland that the Nazis used to send people east. And I went to Auschwitz, where she died. But I could never write to Hillesum like I did to Mansfield because of her perishing at Auschwitz. I felt that there's nothing that I could in any way respond to. But those are the only two. I find it's very difficult. You feel scared because they're better writers than you. They're always better. And not that it's competition, but they just know so many things that I'll never know, and they manage to put it so beautifully. but it's kind of an homage. Thank you.
Right, I'd like to thank Michael again for being here tonight and Radiant Press for publishing this book and for working with us. Michael will be here to sign and chat for a little while. We have copies of Realia up here at the signing table and also at on the desk that you would have passed when you came in. Otherwise, thank you all so much for coming out tonight, and I hope you all have a good evening.